Begin the current Daf, Masech Yevamos Daf, Kufiyat Gimel. We begin on the bottom of Kufiyat Beis, 7 lines up on the bottom of the Yommi. We begin the Gemara explaining the primary concept. Really, we had this mission that opened up this parak Cheresh and Asa, which was one theme, but it just had many different examples to illustrate what will be some ramifications of this rabbinic marriage of the Cheresh and the Chereshes. And now Gemara begins to explain the halachic qualifications of this rabbinic marriage. Something that's discussed in today's daf are the reasons for Nisur Cheresh. Biblically, there's no marriage. Why did the Rabbanan make such marriage? The distinction between Nisur Cheresh and Nisur Ketana, although they're both rabbinic marriages, when a Cheresh who's deaf mute, who doesn't have das, and a Katan, which is a Ketana, that there's a difference regarding those marriages. The status of an Eishes Cheresh regarding the Isser of Eishes Ish, because ultimately it's not really a full-fledged marriage. The question is, how do we qualify that regarding Eishes Ish? If Asham Tali only applies to Chaticha Achas Savik Heter Savik Isser, or Savik Chaticha Achas Meshtei Chatichas, when you qualify Asham Tali? Asham Tali is when you don't know if you committed a sin. Is that even by one piece? You're not sure if this is Chaylev or Shuman, or you have two pieces. You're not sure which one is which. When do we qualify what's considered Asham Tali? The reasons for Rabbi Lazar that an Eishes Cheresh is a Safek Eishes Ish. Why would that be a Safek Eishes Ish? And also, Isha Shaita cannot be divorced midrabanan. So, although her whole marriage is not really valid, but rabbinically she cannot be divorced. So, we begin the current daf, Kufiyat Beis, 7 lines up in the bottom of the Amid. Amid Ambacham. We mentioned the Mishnah that the marriage of a Cheresh or Cheresh is affected midrabanan. The Gemara says, what's the difference by a deaf mute man or a deaf mute woman? The Rabbanan instituted marriage because our Mishnah said, we said that this woman would require chalitza if her husband died without any children. Obviously, that there is marriage and kedushin for a cheresh, even though he's not someone of intelligence, which obviously biblically his kinyan is not a kinyan and therefore is not going to have a marriage. So obviously it's rabbinic institution. So why did Rabban institute marriage for a cheresh and a cheresh? It's not the same word. One's with a kamatz, one with a segel. One's a man and one's a woman. And that Rabban did not institute marriage for someone who is mentally deranged. The time that Linda Bryce a deaf, a mentally deranged and a minor. Let's say they get married to women and they die. The wives are exempt from chalitza. There's no biblical marriage over here, and there's no even rabbinic marriage over here. In contrast, by cheresh and cheresh, as we said in the Mishnah, that require chalitza. What's the difference? We always say them together. Cheresh, shayt b'katan. We always mention them together. Why was cheresh singled out to have a rabbinic marriage in contrast to shayt b'katan? Says the Gemara, Cheresh v'Cheresh is a deaf mute man and woman. The kaima tekavda derabana that the rabbinic institution will hold through, where the norm is that even if someone's deaf mute, they usually have marital harmony. Even the Cheresh with a Cheresh, it's for sure if the man is not a Cheresh. So tekin l'Rabban, the Rabban instituted marriage for them. But a shaita, even if it's a mentally sane woman who's married to a mentally deranged man, or b'shaita, or a mentally deranged woman who's married to a mentally sane man, that it's not normal for them to have marital harmony. For sure, if a shaita is married to a shaita, the rabbinic takan is not going to hold through because a person cannot live with a snake in one box. It's very difficult to have a marriage like the Rabban is doing. The Rabban are not going to make a marriage for somebody that's not going to work out because the person is psychotic. The person doesn't have a healthy state of mind, which Taisus points out. If they already got married, that we said in the Mishnah that you can't divorce anymore because she's not going to know how to protect herself, as the Gemara is going to say on Amid Beis of our Daf. But to get married, to make a marriage initially with a shaita, that's not something that's going to be maintained. So they didn't institute marriage in the first place. They could have shalom bayis. But then the Gemara says, okay, mashna katan. But what's the difference by a child who we said that shaita v'katan, that they both get married? There's no chalitza, there's no rabbinic even marriage. The loitikin Rabban is doing Rabban did not institute a marriage, but that's something that you could have shalom bayis with a youngster, with a child, with an 8-year-old boy. The cheresh the kin Rabban is doing. So what's the difference by a cheresh that a deaf mute who's also not doesn't have das? Why is it any different than the katan? Why didn't you make a rabbinic marriage for a child, for a boy? Says the Gemara, because cheresh delay asi. A deaf mute who's never going to come into the category of biblical marriage, because he's never going to have das. So the king Rabban instituted a marriage so that he shouldn't be Lein Berstein without ever getting married. A young boy who's going to end up coming to the category when he becomes bar mitzvah, but the king Rabban did not institute a marriage for a boy who's going to end up having a marriage. Why do we need to make him get married right now? But then the Gemara says, wait a second about a ketana. But what do you say about a young girl? She's also going to come to the category of marriage when she becomes bas mitzvah. And with the king Rabban, the Sunnah Rabban instituted, we know there's a rabbinic marriage for a young girl when her father's not alive. Her brothers and her mother can marry her off. That's rabbinic marriage. Why do they make over this? She's going to come l'chal nesuin. Says the Gemara, that's for a specific reason. We don't want people to treat her in an ownerless way. And that is, if we don't find someone to marry her, no one's going to protect her because her father's not alive. And they're going to go ahead and act with her in a way of znus because she's an innocent girl who could be mistreated. And therefore, that's why they instituted the rabbinic marriage by a ketana, but there's no need to make it by a kat. Now, the Gemara, however, goes through many different differences between the rabbinic marriage of a chadeshes and in the Sunnah Rabban of a Yisrael ketana. Says the Gemara, Ma'ishme ketana ma'ena. What's the difference? Why is it? We know we've mentioned already in the past parak a bunch of times that this halachic known as miyun, which is the rabbinic marriage of a katana. She could just refuse. She could just walk out, say, I don't want this anymore. I don't even want that he sent me to the grocery. Whatever, she could walk out. Why do we find the concept of miyun by the chadeshes? What's the difference? They're both rabbinic marriages, and just like the katana could walk out by doing miyun, the chadeshes should also be allowed to walk out by doing miyun. Says Gemara, no. That would be the case as Getinta with Kovya Gimel and Aleph. No one's going to get married to the Chareshes because she could always do miyun. And because her status of deaf mute, of their big marriage, is forever. The girl, there's a limit to how much it is. Because once she becomes an adult and they do bia, it's over. It's already made into a biblical marriage and she can't do miyun. So the husband thinks, okay, I'll keep her calm and I'll appease her until she becomes old enough that she can't do miyun anymore. So that's why we can allow miyun by the Gedana, but if you allow it by the Chadesh, no one's going to want to get married because you're already married for 10 years. You're like, okay, I'm out of here. And no man wants that. Then the Gemara has another question. What's the difference that if her mother married her off to a kohen, the Ketana, although it's only rabbinic marriage, she can eat truma. What's the difference by a deaf mute, where if let's say her father did not marry her off when she was a child, where she's getting married herself, which her marriage is not considered a full-fledged marriage, only rabbinic marriage, that she cannot eat truma. That's not. It was a Mishnah we learned in Gittin and Mesechus Idiyos. Hey, Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudguda. He testified the following two halachas. First of all, al chadesha shezia avia, regarding the deaf mute, that her father married her off when she was a child, sheyoytzu beget, that she could go out with a get, even when she becomes an adult and her father is not going to receive her get. We already mentioned this in the Mishnah, that she could go out, even though her kedushin are full-fledged biblical marriage. However, the reason is because her gerushin doesn't need her awareness, her consent, her knowledge, her das, because a woman could be divorced with her will or against her will. So that's the chiddush that he's saying, that even though her father married off and she has a biblical marriage, when he's going to be divorcing her, she's not going to have das. It's okay, it doesn't make a difference. We don't need her das anyway. That's one thing he said. And also about Ketana Bas Yisrael, regarding a young Jewish girl, meaning an orphan that was married off by her mother, not by her father. Shenis is a kohen. If she gets married to a kohen, she'oicheles b'truma, that she could eat truma, even though her marriage is not a full-fledged marriage. She's still allowed to eat rabbinic truma, as the Gemara explains this in Daf Tzadim and Alv. It's somewhat regarding rabbinic truma. Okay, fine. But the Gemara makes a diak. But a deaf mute cannot eat even rabbinic truma because you already were talking about a chareshes. Why'd you go and then skip chareshes and go to a katana? You could have just said, you're talking about anyways rabbinic marriage. You should have said, Val chareshes shenisnus mi atzma, which is not a biblical marriage because her father didn't marry off. Why switching? Why shifting to a katana? Obviously, because this halach of eating truma of the rabbinic marriage is only by a katana, not by a chereshes. Why? What's the pshat in that discrepancy between the eating of truma? So the Gemara says a little bit of a cheshbon, but the Gemara first says, oh, it's a gzeira. What's the concern? Shemiyachal cheresh bechareshes, which Rashi right away points out that's not a good answer because you're telling me that when a regular man is married to a chereshes, the chereshes cannot eat truma. And you tell me why? Because if the husband's a cheresh who's married to chereshes, what's the difference if it's a pikeach kohen married to chereshes to a cheresh kohen married to chereshes, both of them are not biblical marriages. If this is permitted, then this one should also be permitted, because the whole heter is because they're not b'nei oishin. The chereshes is like a katana; they don't get punishments. It's like a cotton oichel nevelas. When the child is eating not kosher, besides the father or whatever, no one's responsible for them. So that this wouldn't be a valid answer, as the Gemara points out. The Gemara says, so what's the problem? V'leichel, let her eat. Cotton oichel nevelasu. The chereshes is like a child who has no das. Let them eat not kosher. Let her eat truma. What's the problem with that? So the Gemara says, no. It's really gzeira shemiyachal cheresh b'pikachas, which sounds similar, but it's the exact opposite. If the wife is fully sane, not a chereshes, and the husband is a cheresh, as Rashi explains, it's all one big gzeira. Maybe it's going to come out to be the opposite. We don't let, when she's a chereshes, married to a pikeach, because you might have the exact opposite. You might have a cheresh married to a pakachas, which then she obviously has a chiyuv misa. She's a regular, sane, fully competent woman, as the conclusion is. So Rashi explains the reason why we initially gave the answer, which, like Rashi himself, didn't make sense in the beginning, that maybe yachal cheresh bechareshes. Why didn't we say right away? Because you might have a cheresh feeding a pakachas, because a cheresh bepakachas doesn't get mixed up with a pekech and a chereshes. You wouldn't make such a mistake with if the wife is a chereshes to when the husband is a chereshes. That wouldn't be confusing. But when the chereshes eish is cheresh, that would get confused with the chereshes eish is pekeach. And then that's going to get mixed up with the cheresh b'pekachas in the cheresh b'chereshes. So it's really a two-pronged step. A cheresh b'chereshes will get confused with a pekeach b'chereshes. And if you're going to let, when you're going to let a cheresh is married to a pekeach, you might let when the cheresh is married to a cheresh. And then cheresh is married to a cheresh, might get confused with a cheresh married to bakachas, which that's a chiyuv misa. So those are the two steps that it's going to come. That's why we don't let, even though technically shouldn't be a problem. Really, cheresh is married to bakach, you should be allowed to. But so Rashi's bothered by the question. So why did you say the same thing by a katana? Katana married to a gadol, to a gadol married to a gadol, and then a gadol married to a gadol married to a cotton, which is a problem. So Rashi says no. Katana to a gadol, there's no concern because there is no marriage for a cotton. You're never going to come to that case of a cotton married to a gadol. If you let a katana married to a gadol, right? So then maybe do the two steps, and Rashi says no, you'll never have that because a cotton doesn't have marriage. So there's no way of having that problem about the concern of a gadol to a cotton. But the Gemara says, fine, even with your answer, I still don't understand. Even if your whole gezerah, your whole concern, if the deaf mute is married to a fully competent woman, that she's going to go ahead and get punishment. But the problem is that's also rabbinic marriage. Because if the husband's a cheresh, forget about the wife being a bekachas, he's a cheresh. He can only have a rabbinic marriage because he's not fully sane. So lechem b'truma drabanan. Why can't she eat rabbinic truma? Which is anyways the case like the katana, what she's eating too. The Gemara says yes, but we're concerned in that case where the husband is not doesn't have full das, that the wife might end up eating. And again, that's the difference between the katana. Even by katana, if she ends up fine, it's cut neichel nevelas. But here, if she's an adult woman, she's a fully responsible woman. If we're going to let her eat rabbinic truma, which she's allowed to because rabbinic marriage, she might come to eat biblical truma, which that's a problem. She's eating a chiv misa, therefore we don't let it becharesh. That's the reason for that discrepancy. I think Gemara goes to a third difference between the katana and chereshes. Ma'ishna katana. What's in between a katana? The isla ksuba. She gets a ksuba. She gets a dowry when she leaves the marriage. But ma'ishna chereshes. What's different between chereshes? The less ksuba that she doesn't get a ksuba, which the Gemara later going to ask on both these points. How do you know that a katana gets and that a chereshes doesn't? But the Gemara is assuming that that's the case. And why? What's the difference for that reason? Says the Gemara, because if that would be the case, that a chereshes had to have a ksuba, mimni b'lei nasrullah. People are going to hold back. I'm not going to marry chereshes. Again, chereshes is a limited woman, and if we're going to require ksuba, I'm not interested. But a katana, as Rashi points out, people are not going to hold back because she's going to become l'chal das. Even though now she's only 6, how much can you get? She's also a limited wife, but she's going to come to be a fully competent wife. Therefore, that's not going to hold people back. Then the Gemara says, okay, now the Gemara comes to explain what we had assumed. The Gemara says, "V'katana menol de'islik suba." Where do we know that a child, a young girl, gets a ksuba? It's a little bit of a diuk. The Mishnah says in ksubis ha-me'enes. A me'enes, although we said that a young girl gets a ksuba, but if she walks out of the marriage then she's not going to get ksuba because she's leaving against his will. So a me'enes, a girl who does refusal, or vashniya, or a woman that's a rabbinic erva, she also doesn't get ksuba because, as we said on Daf Pehema Beis in Perek Yesh Mutaris, that the Rabbanan penalized her when it's rabbinic that she's going to go ahead and want such a marriage, so she doesn't get ksuba. So to the islandness is because of mekach tois. If a man gets married and it turns out that she can't have any children, so and she's inherently such a woman. So all these three types of women, but they don't get ksuba. Aval, yoytze beget viketana, but, and this is what you see clearly from the Mishnah, if she goes out with a get and she's a minor, then yesh ksuba, she gets ksuba. So you see clearly that from this dik of this Mishnah, which is really it's showing us it's only when she's me'enes. But if she's the dik of the Mishnah that says me'enes, you see that obviously it's because she left against his will. But if he divorces her with a get, then she's gonna get ksuba. Okay. And the second half of the equation, mechadeshes, no the less ksuba. How do we know that a deaf mute woman does not get ksuba? The time I'm the Brisa. Brisa says chedesh shebeshoytish nasu pikaches. If let's say deaf mute man or mentally deranged man to get married to a fully competent woman, even if it ends up being that the deaf mute becomes where he gets his hearing and his speech back, and the mentally deranged man becomes fully sane, doesn't make a difference. They don't have any rights on the husband for a ksuba because they don't have das. And even though he made a t'nai, there's no such stipulation. And even though the Rabban instituted that there's marriage for a cheresh, but they did not institute that there's going to be a ksuba for him, as we'll explain shortly. The reason is because more than a man wants to get married, a woman wants to get married. So if you want to get married to the shaita, to the cheresh, fine, go ahead. But we're not going to institute any ksuba for the cheresh because the cheresh is going to find. See, this is going back all the way. It's not only a shidduch Christ. It's going back where the women want to get married, and the man had the upper hand. He said for the chereshes that she has the lower hand, but the man, we didn't have to make a ksuba to have her want to marry the cheresh. Now, if they want to maintain them, now that they're fully sane, yes, the ksuba, as the Gersa is mana, that then they get a ksuba because he wants to. But that's his prerogative. Now, let's say the other way around. Let's say a fully sane man gets married to a deaf mute woman or mentally deranged woman. Then, if the mana, then even if he writes a huge ksuba of 100 mana, the ksuba is going to be maintained because he wants to harm his assets. Meaning, even though the Chum did not institute a ksuba for the chadeshes, but he's writing it for her. Since he wants to cause a loss of his money and to do that, so then it's going to be a valid stipulation. Which the Gemara points out, time in the Ratza, it sounds because he wants to. Holei Ratza, let's say he doesn't want to and he didn't write for a ksuba. Then she does not get a ksuba from the Chacham's Takana. That's exactly the right. We wanted to show you that the Chadeshes does not have a ksuba. Now, the reason for this is because if that would be the case, that you had to give her a ksuba, people hold back, they wouldn't get married to her. So the Gemara says, wait a second, if that's the case, let's go the other way around. If you're telling me that as someone who's deaf mute gets a limited opportunities for shidduchim, and if people are not going to marry the chadeshes if you require a ksuba, then why don't you say that it's the same way too? Pikachas lechedesh, a fully regular, healthy woman to a deaf mute man, l'saka ksuba. We should institute that she should get a ksuba from the chedesh because if that would be the case that you don't, he's not going to get any shidduchim because he's a deaf mute. Says he well no, a well-known statement. More than the man wants to get married. The woman wants to get married. They show you their fingers, say, "Where's the ring?" They want to get married, and the man is like holding back. He's hemming, he's hawing. He's like his commitment phobia. No, but the women they want it. So therefore, don't worry. Even if it's a chedesh, we don't have to make a ksuba because she's going to want to get married, and then they didn't have to nesaki that. However, in spite of this, the Gemara brings a story. Who chedesh there was a deaf mute man. The Habib B'Shivavusa did a malkia. There was a neighborhood of Ramalkia, and Antzvi Itza, so the chedesh needed some shidduchim help, and Ramalkia married him off a woman. He wrote in the ksuba, 400 zuz from his assets. So Rabbi said, Manchakim Ramalkia, who's so smart like Ramalkia, the Gavar Rabbi that is a great person, Savar he held like this. It says, if this chedesh needed some cleaning help, a maidservant, a live-in to help him, wouldn't we go ahead and purchase for him So Kashkin Hacha, for sure over here, Dikatarti, where you have to say this in the right way, but for sure over here, where you get both, you get someone to help out, and you also get a wife. So for sure, you write a large ksuba. I mean, although we said that we weren't masakin for a chedesh ksuba, but if a person's looking for a woman to be a helper, for sure it's deserving of spending that money from the chedesh because it's necessary for him. Now, related discussion regarding the marriage of a chedesh. So I'm going to Barashi Mashmul. He says, Eishes chedesh, the wife of a deaf mute, ein chayav nalei asham tali. There's no liability for having an extramarital relationship with her for asham tali. Meaning, you might say that she's a suffix Eishes ish. Why would you say she's a suffix ish? Which that would be asham tali. You're not sure you commit a sin or not, because maybe he had das, maybe he didn't, and therefore if a man has relations with the wife of the chedesh, would require an asham tali. So that's what Shmuel is saying, that no, for sure there's no biblical kinyan over here, and therefore you're not going to make a korban of asham tali, because biblically you did not do a sin. She's not married to the chedesh. She has no das. There's no suffix in that matter. Says, let me say, let's bring a Mishnah Masechtas Truma that supports the teaching of Shmuel. Why? The Mishnah says, the following 5 individuals cannot take truma. If they took truma into the Muslim truma, the truma is not going to be valid truma. And they are chedesh, someone who is a deaf mute, and this is what the raya was from. Shaita, someone who's mentally deranged. A cotton and a minor. These three we always mention together. They have no das, so therefore their truma is not valid. But another one is someone who takes truma from that's not his own produce, and the owner didn't tell him to do it, because the halach of shlichus is learned down in Kedushin of Memal from a base from that it says gam atem, which it doesn't say just atem, it says and gam atem, which includes also your agent. So therefore, just like you have to do it, obviously with your intelligence, your shlich also has to be with your intelligence. And therefore, if he did it, that's not his own, without the tzivui, that's not going to be valid truma. And the last one is, if an idol worshiper does truma of that of the Jews, so even if the Jew gave him permission, in truma to truma, it's not going to be a valid truma, because also Gamatim teaches you ma'atim b'nei beris, just like you are men of the covenant, so to your shlich has to be with b'nei beris, which excludes a non-Jew. Okay, but one thing we see over here from this Mishnah Masechtas Trumas is that we said the chedesh, his truma is not a valid truma, and it's going to be permitted for a non-kohen. It's not going to be the halacha as truma. Now, if you're going to say that it's a suffix, like we said that if you held it to asham tali, Shmuel said it's not a suffix. If it was a suffix, then the halacha should have been what's called truma b'yasa b'yitrim. It's not sure. Was it truma or not? So it should have said, it's truma, but you have to do truma again. It doesn't say that. It says it's not a truma. So that's like Shmuel, it says not even a suffix, and therefore it's not asham tali. So the Gemara actually says that no, you can't support Shmuel from this Mishnah, because actually you could say that regarding truma, who the Amar, that actually Shmuel himself would not even agree to this Mishnah in Trumas. And he would actually hold Kireb Elazar, that actually holds that it is a suffix. Wait a second, if it's a suffix, not like this Mishnah which holds it's definitive, so how could Shmuel say that you're not Chayv Hashem Tali? Isn't this Mishnah like him? We say no, it doesn't have to be like him. He could actually hold that not. He could actually hold Truma B'Yachas B'Yitrim. So then why is he not Chayv Hashem Tali? Because he holds like Kireb Elazar. It's time they learn the Brisa. What's this? That Rabbi Elazar holds as a suffix. Rabbi Yitzchak Rabbi Elazar says, Trumas Chedesh, like Teitzi L'chulin. He says, you're right, if a Chedesh takes a Truma, it doesn't go out to be Chulin. Why doesn't it go out to be Chulin? Nishu suffix, because it's a suffix. So the Gemara says, wait a second. He's three Rabbi Elazar, so if you tell me he holds not like this Mishnah in Trumas, and he holds like Rabbi Elazar, it's a suffix, so, because obviously he holds that the intelligence of a Cheresh is doubtful, it's not definitively no das, so Hashem Tali Nam L'chayiv. So then, that's obviously, isn't that what the halacha of Hashem Tali is? When you're not sure, so then you should be Chayav Hashem Tali, having a relation with the wife of the Cheresh. So the Gemara, no, very important cloud, because Be'inon Chaticha Mishtei Chatichas. You need to have that it's one piece out of two pieces. So regarding the wife of the Cheresh, yes, although it's a suffix, it's not going to have halacha of Hashem Tali. Why? Because by Hashem Tali, by the suspended guilt offering, it says Achas Mikol Mitzvahs Hashem, which we read that as mitzvahs, which sounds like in the plural it's one out of two. Meaning, what does that mean? What does it mean one out of 2? That there is something kosher and something not kosher in front of you. So for example, let's say regarding the wife, it would be his wife, and the married woman with him in the house. He thinks only his wife is there, and he has relations with one of them. In the morning, it turns out there were two women in the house. Doesn't know which woman it was. So too he has a kosher piece of fat and a non-kosher piece of fat. He thinks they're both kosher, and he eats one of them, and it turns out the one that was not kosher doesn't know which one that he ate. Which, if he knew, he would have brought a chatas nekeva, and now that he doesn't know, he brings a asham zachar b'kesav shkal. But over here, by the wife of the cheresh, where the suffix is dependent on one piece, you just don't know, is this piece asur, is it mutter, which this woman you don't know if it's asur mutter, then you're not going to bring a asham talai. So that's the halacha of Shmuel. He doesn't bring a asham talai not because it's not a suffix, but because it's a suffix in one thing like Rabbi Lazar. So the Gemara says, is that really so? Rabbi Lazar himself requires, you tell me he would hold like Rabbi Lazar, they would hold that the das of a chedesh is a suffix, and therefore not like the Mishnah said this truma is, so it doesn't go out to be chulin, because maybe it is truma. But how could he be like Rabbi Lazar? Does Rabbi Lazar himself require that asham talai has to be 1 out of 2? But we're talking in the Bryce, Rabbi Lazar, he says koi is a suffix behema, a suffix chaya. Rabbi Lazar says chayav na chel by asham talai. So you're liable for its fats and asham talai. Now over here, the suffix is in this animal itself. We're not sure, is it behema, is it a chaya? So Rabbi Lazar himself holds Yevamos Daf asham talai, and he does know it has to be 1 out of 2. So how can you say that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Lazar? Someone says no. Shmuel saver Rabbi Lazar bechada. He holds like him on one point, which is that the das of Bechedesh is a suffix, not like the Bishop said this Trumas. But he disagrees with him on another one, that it doesn't have to be, that it can't be just one piece, it has to be 1 out of 2. So that's how we explain Shmuel. So it's not necessarily that he holds that Bishop said this Trumas. Now this was a one version. Big Dama, they also say a different version. That actually Omar Pchia Barashi, Omar Shmuel, Eishes Chedesh, Chayav Nalem Asham Taleh. Not like the first version. That actually you can be liable Asham Taleh because, yes, maybe there's das by the chedesh, so you're not sure if you're committing iser eshes ish with the wife of the chedesh. So on that the Gemara says Meisir. The Gemara in the Mishnah says Trumas Chamish Lo Yitroimu, that there's 5 people that cannot do truma when there was a chedesh, that there's not even a suffix, that it's not going to be truma at all. So you see, not like Shmuel. Says the Gemara, yes, some like Rabbi Lazar, like Rabbi Lazar, who totally like Rabbi Lazar, that know that it's first of all that it's a suffix, and also that it's doesn't have to be 1 out of 2. It could even mean that one itself. So that's totally like Rabbi Lazar. That's the second version. Now the Gemara explains. Boy Ravash says, "My time Rabbi Lazar. What's the reason Rabbi Lazar why the wife of a chedesh that he's considering it as a suffix? He said it's a suffix. The chedesh is a suffix, and therefore we said let's say his truma is a suffix, and therefore we're saying regarding the eshes chedesh it's a suffix. You're chayv asham talei. What's the reason? So the Gemara explains. What's the question? Mishud Tritle, is it that it's obvious to Rabbi Lazar, the chedesh, that by a deaf mute, daiti klishtu, that his intelligence is very small, where he's not so sharp to understand things like other people. That's obvious to Rabbi Lazar. But he wasn't sure about that little bit of intelligence that he has. Idaita tzilusa, is that intelligence clear? And whatever it is that he focuses on, that he does something, most definitely he's having intent, as a getin damabez. Or maybe it's not a clear intelligence, but whatever it is, all the days of the chedesh, it's obvious to Rabbi Lazar that it's one intelligence to the chedesh. Meaning, it's not that sometimes he's intelligent, sometimes he's not. The reason why he called the chedesh a suffix, if he has das, was because I know he has a small amount of intelligence, and I know he doesn't switch states. He's always in the same state. Question is, but how is that lucid? That small amount of intelligence, or is not? Was that what he held? Why the suffix? Dimel, maybe no. Pshitale was obvious to him. The daita kalishta, yeah, that his intelligence is very inferior. V'lav daita tzlusu, and that intelligence is not clear intelligence. And here the reason is that he's endowed. That was why, because even the itim cholim, because sometimes he's totally intelligent. And that he's totally intelligent, and we're concerned that maybe at the time of confusion he was fully saying v'idin shaita, and sometimes that he's deranged. In other words, the question is, when you're saying you have a suffix, is it a constant or is it a changing variable? The first side is saying that it's a constant. This small das that he has, is that a das that could do something? He wasn't sure. Or do you say that no? I know that his das, that when he's inferior, is not clear. The question is that always? Does he sometimes get like that lucid moment, or does he not? So the Gemara says, okay, what's the difference? Why are you asking this lomdisha question in the principle of Velaz that's a subject? What's the difference? The Gemara says, I'll tell you, a good difference is lohoisi ish to beget. Is could he divorce his wife with a get? Meaning, if he was always a chedesh, according to Rabbi Lazar, the question is, would he be able to divorce her or not? Because, as Rashi points out, according to Rabbanan, obviously he could divorce her. As we said in the Mishnah on Kufiyat Beis and Beis, just like he could get married with Jemiza, he could divorce with Jemiza. But the question, according to Rabbi Lazar, considers him a suffix. What would the halacha be? As the Gemara explains the question. If you say he has a constant, weak intelligence, it doesn't change. We just don't know how strong it is or not. So kikidushin kachgerushin. So that means the marriage is just like the divorce. That of course he could divorce her because whatever state he was in to marry, he's in that same divorce to the same state to divorce. But if you say that his suffix of the das of the chedesh was because sometimes he's sane, sometimes he's insane. So maybe kedushin mitzvah mekadosh. Yes, maybe he could get married because rabbinically we say, and maybe even deraisa, because maybe in that moment he had intelligence, you can get married. But you're playing Russian roulette over here. Maybe he can't get divorced because maybe at that moment he's not sane. My word, Allah says, you must take a look. It's not clear what was the underlying principle of Belazar, why he held it to suffix that would make a huge nafkamina regarding if he could give a get or not. If it's like the second tzad, then he wouldn't be able to give a get. According to the first tzad, he would be able to give a get. So he said in the Mishnah that nishtatis v'chulu. He said if the woman became mentally deranged, he could not divorce her. So the Gemara actually explains, Rabbi Yitzchak, he says, that Dvar Torah, according to biblical law, a mentally deranged woman could get divorced because just like a regularly fully sane woman who we don't need her awareness, her intelligence, or consent, could be against her will, and therefore this would apply to a shaita. Now, why did they say that the mentally deranged woman cannot be divorced? Because we don't want people to treat her in a careless manner because she's a shaita and she has no one to protect her anymore because she's divorced. So the Gemara says, wait a second, hey, then what's the case talking about? What's the question? If she knows how to protect her divorce document, she knows how to protect herself, even though she's a shaita, so they're going to treat her on this way. What do you mean? Even though she's mentally insane, she could take care of herself. Ella, what are you going to say? No, she doesn't know how to protect. She wouldn't know how to safeguard her divorce document or herself. Then the Gemara says, wait a second. Do you think that biblically she would be able to be divorced? But it says in the pasuk, that he has to give the get and put it into her hand, which teaches us this is only if she has quote unquote the metaphorical hand to be divorced. She doesn't have a hand to divorce herself, meaning to say she has no way of protecting her get. Similarly, B'tan Rabbi Shmuel is taught in the Brayso of Rabbi Shmuel. It says in the pasuk that he should send her from his house. What does that mean? He's going to send her away from his house. If he sends her away and she doesn't come back, a shaita doesn't get the hint that the shaitim, they're not embarrassed. She comes right back in. Didn't I send you in and give you again? She's sleeping in the bedroom again, right? So that's not considered b'shulchan mebeisai. So a shaita, you tell me that biblically it should be divorced, only rabbinically. What do you mean? It's not even biblically divorced. So the Gemara says, no, it's necessary. We're talking about a middle category. The Deslish Magita, she has enough intelligence to protect her divorce document, and therefore she knows that to be sent away, she's not going to come back anymore. You'll have a shulchan mebeis, you have a nas b'yada, but by any deslish master, she doesn't know how to protect herself. She's from the vulnerable population because she's still a shaita. People can take advantage of her. So that's what saying. Divat Torah, according to biblical law, shaita meskadesh, such a shaita would be divorced. But because the deslish magita, she knows how to protect her get. But the Rabbi said no, not to let her go. But they have to go. We don't want people to treat her in a disrespectful way. Rabbi says, take a nami. Besides reading about Mishnah indicates the way we're saying it. Because the Tanagabi Dida, meaning that it's a rabbinic law. Because we said regarding her, what did we say in the Mishnah? As we quoted, Nishtatz, if she becomes mentally deranged, in the marriage we said, Lo Yotzi, he cannot divorce her. That's all we said, Lo Yotzi. But Begabi Didei, we said regarding the man, if he becomes mentally deranged, the words were Lo Yotzi Oila Mis. He cannot divorce her forever. Now the question is, why is it by the man, when he becomes mentally deranged, we say forever? Why by the woman, it doesn't say forever. Shema Minah, because we're trying to tell you the stress that Ha by the man is deraisa, biblical law. He doesn't have das, he cannot divorce her. Ha, the Rabban by the woman, it's not necessarily that halach. It's a rabbinic law, so we don't say Lamas does not have that finality like you have by the biblical law. It's only rabbinic. Now we said in the Mishnah that Omer Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri v'chulu. He said he wanted to know what's the difference between when she becomes a deaf mute, meaning when she's a chedeshes, and when he's a chedesh. Why did you say that the chedesh cannot divorce, but the chedeshes could become divorced? So he had the following question. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, who was asking this question, who wanted to have this equality between the chedesh and the chedeshes, what was his primary question? Was it that ish pshitale? He knew by a man that obviously he cannot divorce when he's a chedesh because he needs intelligence and he doesn't have that intelligence anymore. And the isha his question was only regarding the woman. So then, why could she be divorced when she's a chedeshes? Like, didn't maybe know the other way around. Maybe isha pshitale. Maybe it's obvious in the case of the woman because you don't need her das. No woman, you could just give her a get. So that was obvious to him. But his question was, well, then why can't the man also divorce when he's a chedesh? Which one was his question, the man or the woman? So he must have Tashmat's being Uriah. Medikam relay from the fact that when the Chacham answered his question in the Mishnah, what were the words? How they phrase their words? They said that, ain't a daima, you can't compare her ish hamegadish, the man who divorces, leisha miskedeshes. Read the words, you'll see that they're saying there's a halacha by the woman who's getting divorced. And you're trying to compare a man who's divorcing. So it sounds like what's his primary that he was asking on was the man divorcing. They say, no, don't compare the man divorcing to a woman who's getting divorced. Said the Mishnah, the woman could be divorced with her consent, without her consent. But the man only divorces with his will. So Shema Minah says the Gemara, obviously ish coming by. Obviously, the question was regarding the man, and the woman was obvious to him, because if the question was regarding the woman and the man was obvious, so they should have said, because that's the primary principle. Which one are you comparing to? Obviously, the question was on the man, and saying, don't compare. You're asking what's the difference between the man and the woman. No, don't compare the man to the woman. Yes, the woman doesn't need a das, but you're trying to compare the man. No. So that's the Gemara's attempt. The Gemara said, no, Adam, to the contrary. Because if you look at the Mishnah, there were two parts to the response that the Chacham gave to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And on the second response, they said to him, because they brought in Rabbi Yochanan a good day. They wanted to prove their point. They brought in his with a chadeshes, and they wanted to prove their point. And they said, aha, Abzu, there's this also. Meaning, regarding this same woman that became a chadeshes, Kayitzba is the same thing, just like a chadeshes that her father married her off. Although the marriage was biblical, it's still you see that she can get or get, even in the state of chadeshes. But something says the Gemara that Shema Minah obviously Isha can boile, because they're bringing a right to the woman. So which one was the question? The first response sounds like it was regarding the man. That was his question. Second response sounds like that it was regarding the woman. So which one was it? So the Gemara says, Ela rather Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri l'divrayim kamalahu. He was saying regarding what their opinion was, and as follows. He was saying, Lidadi, according to me, just like a man cannot divorce when he's a chedesh, Isha namin lemegasha. The woman also cannot be divorced. And that's what the Rabbanan were responding when they said that on the woman. And they were saying Avzu kayotzeba. The second response they gave was regarding the primary statement of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Because his primary statement was really disagreeing on what? Everyone agrees the chedesh cannot divorce. His disagreement was on the chedeshes. He held that she also cannot be divorced because she doesn't have das. So that's the second response. But what he was telling them was, meaning, and then Rashi says, and the Eina Daima that they responded to him was going on the man. Well, why were they responding on the man? Because he was telling them, but according to you, that you say that a woman could be divorced, so then say the same thing regarding the man. You understand that there's 2 points. His primary point was on the Isha. And that's the second thing they said to him. So what's the first sentence that sounded like it was on the man? Because he was saying, okay, fine. That you're saying that the woman could be, then say the man also. And that's Amrullah. They said that no, and you can't compare the man divorcing the woman getting divorced because the man has to have das. Because the woman doesn't have to have das. So therefore, again, it was both points. One was regarding his primary point, which is the woman, which is the second thing they said to him. And the other thing was, the first thing they responded to him, the man, was regarding because his argument to what you're saying, then say the same thing regarding the man too. Now the Mishnah brought down that Hey Rabbi Yochanan B'chulu. They brought the testimony of Rabbi Yochanan Good Geda regarding the Chaneshes, that her father married her off when she was a Ketana, that, she could be released when she's an adult with a get. So they say, absolutely, this case is going to be the same thing also, where she became a Chaneshes during her biblical marriage. Now, Amar Rava says, interesting, he says, May do such a Good Geda. From this testimony of Rabbi Yochanan that he said that even in a place where you have bona fide Kedushin, regular marriage, shulfa marriage, that you don't need to have the intelligence of the woman when you're divorcing her, as we see that she could be a Chaneshes. So you have the following halacha. Let's say you tell witnesses, look at this get that I'm going to give to my wife, and the wife doesn't hear what he's telling the witnesses. And then he goes and he tells his wife, who's a regular, fully sane woman, he says, here, take this legal document, this deed. He doesn't tell her it's a get. He says it's a shtar chayv. It's some type of a debt, a credit or something. She's going to be divorced. Why? Says Rava, because Mila didn't he say we don't need her intelligence, because by a woman by divorce, like we said, a chaneshes could go out with a get. So we don't need her intelligence. So obviously that of course Rabbi Yochanan for sure hold like that. What's the chiddush? So no, Madam, what would you say? From the fact that he told the kintish here, take this, this loan document that I have. Obviously, then he's nullifying from being a get because he's calling it a shtar chayv. That's what we're saying. That no, it was true that he was nullifying it. He would have said that to the Eidim, that I'm not treating it as a get, I'm treating this as some shtar chayv. He didn't tell this to the Eidim. He didn't nullify it at all. And why did he tell his wife that it's a shtar chayv? The Gersa's law is because of his embarrassment that he said that he was embarrassed that he's divorcing. And never he said that, but never it's going to be valid. But that's the chiddush, that the fact, even though he said that, he wasn't being mevatlet. It was just an embarrassment to his wife, and never it's going to be a valid shtacha because we don't need her das when she's getting divorced. Thank you. Anytime.